Israel's prime minister and other Israeli officials appear to be a little upset about comments made by Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House after her meeting with Netanyahu Thursday. The Times of Israel reporting there's concern that Harris's words could harm the potential for a ceasefire and hostage release deal. After a 40-minute meeting with Bibi on Thursday, Harris addressed members of the media, saying Israel has a right to defend itself, adding that she would not stay silent on the deaths and suffering she says exist in Gaza. Harris called on Israel to end the war, which is nearing the 10-month mark, with terrorists still holding more than 100 hostages that were kidnapped on October 7th of last year. Do want to talk more about all of this and the latest details, so let's bring in Benjamin Anthony, the founder of the Miriam Institute, to talk more about this and the other developments out of the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about the comments that were made by Kamala Harris. Obviously, at this point, a lot of the reaction is just coming in, but I want to get your overall thoughts there on why some Israeli officials might be a little upset about those comments.
Well, thank you very much. The comments by Kamala Harris are not helpful. They are indicative of a growing chorus from the Democratic Party that speaks to a lack of understanding regarding the complexity of the war that Israel is rightfully prosecuting against the terror army Hamas. The words that Kamala Harris spoke really do fly in the face of what's going on the ground, and I want to express why. Just recently, the Israel Defense Forces extracted and retrieved the bodies of 5 individuals who were murdered on October the 7th. They were then taken, their remains were then taken into the Gaza Strip. They were then taken into the tunnels inside the Gaza Strip. And then in the city of Khan Yunis, inside a tunnel beneath that city, terrorists from Hamas took those 5 bodies. They burrowed a side cavity into one of the tunnels, and they then put these 5 bodies into that side cavity, covered it up, and then fled the area. Only as a consequence of the robust work that's being undertaken by the Shin Bet and by the security establishments inside Israel has the IDF now come to possess the intelligence needed to go back into the same tunnels in which it's already operated, in the same city, Khan Yunis, where it's operating again right now, and actually locate this area where these 5 bodies were flung away, were stored by Hamas terrorists in order to retrieve them. That takes months of work. It takes months of intelligence work. And in fact, so difficult was it to locate the whereabouts of these 5 bodies, the IDF actually took in the individual they'd been interrogating to the Gaza Strip in an IDF uniform with his handcuffs on, still, because he's still a suspect, terror suspect, and only with that level of precision were they able to find the 5 bodies. So any notion by Kamala Harris or any notion by Jerry Nadler, the congressman from New York, that suggests that Israel is deliberately elongating the course of this war for political reasons is absolute nonsense, and it speaks to a complete lack of understanding, and Israel's officials are right for saying that such language is unhelpful.
We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is in the U.S. right now. He's been here for several days, and later today he's going to meet with former President Trump over at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. But yesterday he did meet with Vice President Kamala Harris and President Biden, and one day earlier he gave that address to Congress. So I want to ask you, what stood out to you about that congressional address?
So I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is the most gifted orator that the state of Israel has listened to since Abba Eban, who was our first ambassador to the United Nations at the establishment of the state of Israel back in 1948. I also think beyond that, Prime Minister Netanyahu is one of the most talented orators in the history of recorded oratory. And he brought all of those abilities to bear in the address that he gave to the joint session of the United States Congress. However, despite the fact that he was received with rapturous applause and great support from the floor, I actually didn't see or hear, rather, too much that could not have been said from a distance, namely from back home in Israel. What that leads me to believe is actually the entire presentation at the Congress was an act of misdirection. It brought media attention to that oratory. It brought media attention to the Prime Minister rightly defending the justification of the war against Hamas, rightly supporting the bravery and courage of our soldiers, rightly calling for the return of our hostages. All of the attention focused on that, but there's nothing new there. And so what I believe is much more important is what's unsaid. Namely, I think that there are quiet meetings taking place behind closed doors that pertain to Hezbollah, Gaza, and most importantly, what Israel can, will, and might do with regard to the ongoing threat of Iran.
As far as a hostage release ceasefire deal goes, I mean, we kind of delved into that a little bit, but are we any closer now than we were, let's say, a few weeks ago, a few months ago? Does it appear that we are closer to an actual deal?
I don't think that anybody knows how close we are to a deal. There are a number of key sticking points. Among those is Hamas's demand that the citizens of the Gaza Strip who are currently displaced as a consequence of the misery that has been foisted upon them resulting from Hamas's terror attack on October the 7th, that those citizens be able to return to northern Gaza. That's something that Israel and the Israel Defense Establishment is not ready to accept at this stage because it's an incredibly complicating factor in the context of an ongoing hot war such as the one in which we find ourselves. That's one sticking point. Another sticking point is that the Israelis do not want to commit to a permanent ceasefire, but rather to a cessation of hostilities, because one of the war aims is, yes, the return of the hostages. Another one is the destruction of Hamas as a functioning terror army. Obviously, the latter of those two war goals cannot be brought about in the presence of a permanent ceasefire. And in addition to that, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that as long as the negotiations take place, he yet reserves the right to continue fighting against Hamas. Hamas is saying that as long as the negotiations take place, there must be no fighting. Very interesting that those who brought the war upon themselves now seek to dictate the terms, duration, and nature of that war.
And I do want to pop up some of this video right here. This is from a protest, believe it or not, in D.C. outside of the Capitol as Netanyahu was speaking. These protests have been taking place over the past several days as Netanyahu is in the U.S. Now, there was defacing of statues, fires, as you see, being set, flags burned. Netanyahu said during his speech that most of the protesters don't know exactly what they're even protesting. And I do want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others who dismiss these protesters as being useful idiots, for example, or who claim that they don't know for what it is that they are protesting, I think they're being too generous to them. I also think that people applying the moniker of them just being kids, these protesters, should not do so. These are young adults. If they were Israelis, by the way, people of this age would already be in the Israel Defense Forces with real responsibilities upon their shoulders. So the idea of calling these protesters kids or dismissing them as individuals who don't know what they're doing, I think is far too charitable, as I said. The reality of the matter is every single American ought to be deeply concerned about the images that we saw at Union Station, those you just showed, because the students, and they are part of the student community, and the student community is part of them. The students and the youth of today, believe me, as is the case everywhere, will be the policymakers of tomorrow. And they have taken on an attitude that is certainly anti-Israel, but moreover, absolutely profoundly, as they are saying at those demonstrations, as we see from those images, profoundly anti-American. It is found in too frequent a level of incidents. Too often are we seeing these protests, and I remind everybody, the campuses are on summer vacation at the moment, but we saw the absolute tumult of anti-Israel, anti-American sentiment on too many American campuses that may well return when those campuses return to their studies, in inverted commas, this September.
And my last question for you, we know, I've mentioned it a few times, but Netanyahu did meet with Biden and Harris. He is going to meet with Trump later on today at Mar-a-Lago. How pivotal would you say those meetings are right now, especially?
Well, there are two very different goals there, right? The meeting with President Biden came between a prime minister of Israel, who at some point in the near future is very likely to run for re-election, and the president of the United States of America, who does not have another election in his future. He has announced that he does not intend to seek re-election. I think what we have to look for is the nature of the way in which President Biden moves out of the Oval Office with regard to Israel. We remember that President Obama used the opportunity of him leaving office to really put a sting in the tail of his relationship with Israel by abstaining when Resolution 2334, a very anti-Israel resolution, was brought before the United Nations. He really wanted to make a point of his disapproval of Israel's policies, and the Israeli people well remember that. I don't think we'll see that from President Biden. I think we'll see a more positive attitude towards Israel in that sense. Now we come to the meeting in Mar-a-Lago with President Donald Trump. Look, I think that the primary responsibility of Prime Minister Netanyahu is really to undertake the tough work of mending that relationship. We know that President Trump was disappointed with Prime Minister Netanyahu having called President Joe Biden to congratulate him on having been elected when he won the election in 2020. Personally, I don't think that an Israeli Prime Minister has any choice other than to contact the President of the United States and to congratulate him. So I think that we need to salve that sword that President Trump seems to be carrying. And I also think, though, that there's a great opportunity to do so because we recall well the Trump administration's recognition of sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the removal of the American embassy to Jerusalem, and also the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as though the Israeli people needed any outer voice to bestow that recognition upon our absolute sovereignty over Jerusalem as our capital. But we're very grateful for any American administration that they are willing to recognize as much, and the Trump administration did that.
All right. Benjamin Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break it all down. I feel like I could talk to you forever, but is there anything else that you want to add before I let you go?
Yes, I think that what I'd like to add is that those who support the state of Israel but worry about the future prospects of the state of Israel ought to worry not. The state of Israel is rising from the knees onto which it was placed, the bended knees onto which it was placed after the atrocity of October 7th, launched by Hamas against Israeli mothers, daughters, fathers, sons, brothers, sisters, civilians, and soldiers alike. We are coming to our full height once again. We will return to our full height once again. And contrary to what many of the enemies of Israel had hoped for, which was that we were hearing the final cries and whimpers of the temporary Jewish state, what we're actually hearing, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, is the roar of the Lion of Judah. Israel is on the march, Israel is moving forward, and all that we undertake inside the Gaza Strip, regardless of what Kamala Harris or Jerry Nadler have to say about it, all of it is justified, proper, right, correct, and in full adherence with the standards that any other nation would seek to operate by way of if they, God forbid, ever fell prey to such a horrific, horrendous attack.
All right, Benjamin, thank you again for taking the time to join us this morning, and I'm sure we'll have you back soon. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.